And welcome to another episode of CrossPoliticCountdown. I'm Andrew Southwick. Good to see all of you here this week. And we're back on track. We're not doing sports this week, although if you saw our sports show, our special edition covering the Seattle Seahawks versus Los Angeles Rams last week, you'll know that we were right once again. Whenever, especially me and Justin Chartre, our managing editor, whenever we get into sports, we have this nasty habit of being right. I don't know what to say. Now, I will admit I was wrong at one point. And when we talk about the Super Bowl, which we will, I'll be honest, I'll tell you what that is. But right now, we're not talking about that. We've got our guest today, Luke Edison. He is a contributing journalist with CrossPolitic News, and he's got a new article out. It is called ICE Kills Armed Agitator, examining the Pretti incident. Now, we're talking about this Alex Pretti incident today and the broader question that is seen a lot in social media, in the news, and conservatives certainly keep running into. How do we stand for law and order? How do we support our agents who do dangerous work, who have to make split decisions, but still insist on truth, restraint, and accountability, especially when the facts get messy? And as you have seen, especially with the popular stories of late, it is just narrative after narrative after narrative, and everybody's just hoping that their narrative is right, and to the suppression of actual truthful evidence. Now, Luke, in your article, you argue that two things can be true at the same time. One, that Alex Pretti bears major responsibility in his own demise, unfortunately, and that ICE also may have used excessive force in a chaotic split-second decision. So I want to walk through this carefully, and we're going to do this like adults, which is different for the news media, but we're going to try it. We'll see how it fits. Facts first. And we don't care about the narrative, just what actually happened. So, first of all, before we get going, give us a 30,000-foot view. Bullet points of the story. What do we know? What is still in dispute?
Absolutely. So, bullet points of the story are that you have an individual who is Alex Pretti, who showed up at an ICE protest. We now know, actually, in hindsight, which we didn't know when the story first broke, that he had both been at and been destructive and violent at these riots several days prior. On January 13th, video has now surfaced of Alex Pretti attacking an ICE vehicle, kicking off its taillight, shattering its taillight, and overall just being destructive and violent. So that's kind of the background. So he shows up then a couple of days later after that video that has now surfaced, and he shows up armed with an illegal weapon. Now, it is a gun that he legally owns. So people right there might say, wait, how is it an illegal weapon? Well, it was an illegal weapon because it was illegally concealed. Whether or not he has a concealed carry permit, which actually there seems to be some debate on right now from what I've seen, it doesn't matter because he didn't have an ID on him. And not having an ID when you have a concealed weapon is something that makes it illegal and unlawful. So he had an illegally concealed weapon, an illegally possessed weapon. And then he starts a physical altercation. People will say it was in defense of a woman. That's really irrelevant. The point is he physically got involved with ICE agents. There was a scuffle. He then resisted restraint when they were attempting to pull him and then pin him to the ground. You see him fighting back against that. Then an ICE agent, one of about 5 to 8, that are around him and trying to restrain him, yells, "He's got a gun," or something very close to that exact quote. It might just be gun. Either way, then a moment later, one ICE agent, we'll just call him Agent A, removes the gun from Pretti's waistband, and then another agent, we'll call him Agent B, circles around, gets a bead on Pretti where he would be able to shoot at him without shooting his fellow agents, and he opens fire. That's kind of the 50,000-foot view, and we can talk about the breakdown of communication that I think happens, and about the instigating factors as well.
Well, let's start with a I don't know, I don't know if this is a philosophical point or a legal point. It's probably a little bit of both, but from a law and order standpoint, where's the line between protest and interference with an arrest or interference with ICE's duty? Let's establish that baseline before we move forward.
Yeah, right. So I would go right to the Constitution, which says that we have the right to peaceable assembly, and people have, and courts have indeed interpreted this as extending to peaceable protest. So That's really the nuts and bolts of it. So obviously, what's not peaceful is destroying public property. What's not peaceful is destroying government property. What's not peaceful is destroying private property. What's not peaceful is making any sort of undesired physical contact with, whether it be a federal, state employee, or a civilian. These are things that would be called, battery or assault. Any type of aggressive or unwanted physical contact in a legal sense is battery and or assault, depending on the extenuating circumstances or the complicating factors therein. So pretty simple, right? I mean, don't put your hands on someone, including officers. Don't put your hands on someone else's property in a destructive manner. And if you basically follow those rules and are armed in a lawful manner, not an illegal manner, you basically qualify for being a peaceful protester and not a violent and destructive rioter.
Is physically confronting an agent specifically, because this is not the first confrontation of an agent we've seen just in the past few weeks here in America, and we're seeing this more and more. People blatantly, flagrantly challenging law enforcement, whether it's local and federal. I think that is a brewing issue that bodes ominous if it continues to develop. But is physically confronting an agent ever just protest? Is there ever any time when that would just be a protest and not cross the line to assault, or to hostility, I should say?
The only thing I can think of, two scenarios. One would be in a medical scenario, right? So where an agent perhaps is injured or is even unconscious, and you need to make physical contact to attempt to be something like a good Samaritan. We can talk about, good Samaritan laws. There's probably something there, a defense there in that situation. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not giving anyone legal advice. I always want to put that out there. But that would be my opinion on kind of situation number one. And then situation number two, which I would say has to have some legitimacy because of our Constitution, but you'd have to be making a very clear case for it, and I would be very sparing with this one, is when law enforcement or agents are doing something unconstitutional, tyrannical. So for instance, if during the COVID scamdemic, I would say, I think we saw this happening. I think we saw many cases. I wrote pieces on this happening. So when your constitutional rights are being violated, I would say that, just speaking from what I understand the Constitution as putting forward, you do have not only a right, but also a duty to stand up for those rights that are being violated. Again, if you're going to pull that card, though, you better have a very good explanation of what was happening to you and why you did what you did in response. So those are kind of the two situations that, off the top of my head, in my opinion, I would guess would kind of cross that bridge.
You mentioned if law enforcement is doing something unconstitutional, we have a problem with constitutional interpretation, understanding, and acceptance in our culture today. We no longer agree as a nation what our Constitution says, even if our Constitution is good at all. Yeah. The percentage of people that now believe that America is an inherent evil that needs to be overthrown, that needs to be redone, they don't care about the Constitution. So now we're almost, you make it, and I'm not trying to argue against you. I'm just saying we have a problem because we're arguing constitutionality in a post-constitutional culture. How do you reconcile that? At what point do we either have to come together and say, this is what America is, or these are the kinds of things, this is the kind of stuff that spawns national divorce at some point. We just can't live together anymore. We can't agree. Here's the dividing line. What say you?
I completely agree. I'll use someone else's analogy that I've heard talking about morality, but in this sense, I'll use it about America. I'd say both left and right, generally speaking right now, agree that America is sick. If America were a physical, human body, we agree that the body that is America is sick. What we don't agree on is what a healthy body looks like. So a healthy nation in this analogy. So the right says, here's what's constitutional. Here's what's a healthy nation. Here's what that would look like. And the left has their own very much left-wing, progressive, socialist, and Marxist ideas. And they say, no, here's what a healthy body, a healthy country looks like. And to your point, I do think that there is a strong element of national divorce that is not only happening, but has already happened ideologically, geographically, morally in our country. And I think that probably the first step in correcting that is owning that it's not just something that we need to be fearful of happening in the future. A lot of it has already happened. And so how do you correct that? I mean, this comes to the whole debate of is politics downstream or upstream of culture, right? What comes first, cultural change, then political change, or political and governmental change, and then cultural change? I think right now we're seeing at least this current administration try to drive it through political and governmental change. I think that they're doing a decent job. There are some things they could be doing better, but I think politics does drive a lot of culture, historically speaking.
I'll add this. This is your interview. I don't mean to be taken over, but you mentioned, is it politics that's downstream from culture, or culture downstream from politics? I've long argued and been long arguing we're also in really what this war is spiritual. It's manifesting itself as a culture war, but it is spiritual. Government replacing God, big tech replacing God, humanism, all this kind of stuff. We're seeing it. We can inject our way to immortality. We're saying these things out loud and talking about them. And what my concern is that you have an irresponsible media that's just money hungry, looking for clicks and ratings. They have sentence, will travel. Okay. Then you have a reckless government that is just looking for raw power, but is reckless in doing so. And what's happening is it is affecting and molding the hearts of Americans, because I think there's a third element, not just politics and culture, but also spiritual, the inclination of our hearts. If I've pastored for many years, when I'm doing family counseling or marital counseling, unfortunately, there are points where you can see this couple's probably not going to make it, but because the decision has already been made in their hearts. Yeah. And now we're just working out the rest of this business of marriage to get out of this and save as much face as possible. My concern is that that's where we are, that we've already decided I'm not going to be with him. When you look at the amount of people that break off fellowship with their families, break off, you've got John Leguizamo. Nobody's heard of him anymore. But anyway, he acted in a couple of movies, sort of. The famous Super Mario Brothers movie that stunk, but I digress. He doesn't want anybody who's conservative to watch his movies or anything like that. Like we're making these kinds of dividing lines.
Yeah.
There's no middle ground there. There's no conversation to be had there. It is either we agree to now peaceably separate, or this becomes a very combustible situation. I want to get back to the article here. You argue that even if he had a permit, Alex Pretti, even if he had a permit, that not carrying his ID in the first place made the carry unlawful in practice. So walk us through that reasoning and why you think that matters in this case.
Yeah. So this is really something of a sub point, I would say. So a few things to clarify here. One is that this has really no bearing on whether or not he should have been shot, because the agents involved, for better or for worse, had no way of knowing during the scuffle and the altercation, which happened over a span of seconds, whether or not he was legally armed and had his concealed carry permit and his ID with him, or whether he didn't have that. So it really has no bearing. This is more of just, as I said, a sub point meant to speak to people who are kind of trying to make a mockery of the right now and saying, well, I thought you liked guns. I thought you liked the Second Amendment. He was legally carrying, which actually there now seems to be some debate on as the days have gone by. It seems that the media as a whole was confusing open carry with concealed carry. So whether or not he had a concealed carry permit is in debate. But again, it's irrelevant because if you have a concealed weapon and a legal concealed carry license, the other thing under Minnesota law that you're required to carry is a government issued photo ID, which we were told at the press conference he did not have on him. So this would the simple analogy here is like if you're a legal car owner and driver, you're allowed to drive a car, but you go take a spin and get in an accident and you don't have your ID on you. Well, now you become an illegal operator of that vehicle in, I think, all 50 states of our country. So that's basically the analogy there. It's just really a point of clarification and some false claims that I see primarily coming from the left, ignoring that point.
There is one of the claims is that the agents disarmed him in order to execute him. You reject that claim. You call it absurd in the article. What parts of the footage, body positioning, evidence that has been released so far, maybe some that has come out since the article was published on CrossPoliticNews.com, what informs that judgment, that position?
Yeah, so simply this, and I've talked to quite a few people on multiple sides of this issue in my personal life about this. And what I was able to drill down to is really most of our contention boils down to this exact topic. And it's the question of, did the shooting agent, who I earlier called Agent B, did he know and had he been communicated with by Agent A, who was the disarming agent? I think if you watch the video, the clear answer is obviously no. Not only does he not appear to have made any type of verbal or visual contact, eye contact, anything with the disarming agent, you see legs and arms and bodies flailing in the scuffle. So there's no way that in that fray, I think any normal person would have seen exactly who disarmed the gun. They would just see an arm reaching in there and hear someone screaming, "Gun, gun, gun." So if that's the case, which it certainly appears to be, then I think that while it was a mistake to shoot Pretti, and I'm careful to say mistake, I don't think it was morally wrong. I think it was an understandable mistake. And the mistake part is because he didn't need to be killed. I think he had been disarmed, which is clearly on the footage. And there were at least 5 agents around him and fighting to restrain them. They clearly would have won that fight physically. However, the mistake is understandable and not morally wrong. The reason I say that is because if you're an agent and you see hands flailing around, and this guy, as we know now, has been violent in recent days, they probably have him on a list of violent agitators, and he is illegally armed, and you hear gun, gun, gun as he's resisting arrest after starting a physical altercation, those are a lot of circumstances and elements that lead up to an agent understandably drawing and shooting. So again, the real question here is, did Agent B have any sort of communication with Agent A telling him that Pretti had been disarmed? I think if you look at the video, it literally has, I think I say in my article, if you take your finger and snap it 4 times, boom, 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 boom. That is about the time span, if you go and time it with your stopwatch, that it takes from gun, gun, gun to shots on Pretti. And for most people, that's totally understandable. If there is a gun, which was correctly identified, the individual is fighting back, shots are understandable. It's merely, did he know that he had been disarmed? And I think the answer is no.
The last few minutes here on this episode, you compare this shooting to Ashley Babbitt, who I would argue was murdered on January 6th. That is my own opinion. And you argue that there's a moral inconsistency with how the threats are perceived and how they're mourned. What are the consistency criteria that you're applying to both cases?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just kind of try and fly through the list of the comparison that I have in the article. So let's just consider the 2 circumstances side by side, if we can, visually in our minds. So you have, on one hand, Ashley Babbitt, Air Force veteran. On the other hand, you have Alex Pretti, nurse. Okay, so 2 respected and hard-earned occupations that are generally honorable. Then you have Ashley Babbitt, a small, young-ish woman. I believe she was in her 30s, perhaps early 40s. Not a big or imposing, threatening physical feature. You have Alex Pretti, a male, so immediately more imposing. And he's decently large, much larger than Ashley Babbitt was. Then you have Ashley Babbitt, unarmed, entirely unarmed. Then you have Alex Pretti, illegally armed. You have Ashley Babbitt, made no physical contact with the agent who shot her dead, or the Capitol policeman. You have Alex Pretti, initiated a physical altercation and then resisted restraint. So I think when we look at these two, we actually see that if you are someone who is going to say in any sense that Ashley Babbitt deserved what she got, or that she wasn't murdered, or that it was justified, or even if you're simply someone who just didn't mourn her, you just didn't care, then I really don't want to hear it about Alex Pretti, because Alex Pretti, by every metric we just went through, every metric that we can look at from a kind of a threat criteria, Alex Pretti was worse. And now Ashley Babbitt, my personal opinion is she was somewhere where she shouldn't have been, and she was doing something that she shouldn't have been doing. That doesn't mean she deserved to get killed. That's my opinion on Ashley Babbitt. But I would say if you're going to make any type of justification for the shooting of Ashley Babbitt, as many on the left did, if they acknowledged her at all, then I don't see any case for arguing for the innocence and alleged execution or murder of Alex Pretti.
You blame an unholy trinity of legacy media, some politicians, social media campaigns for getting people killed, even in general. Tell me a little bit specifically, what do you mean misinformation, rhetoric, organizing tactics? Because this is especially misinformation. I hear that term all the time. It makes me, it annoys me, just the word of it, because I know it's used for propaganda. It's used actually to screw up the information that's the truth. It's used as an excuse to censor real truth. How is this unholy trinity now really endangering the lives of Americans?
Yeah, so I would go back to a scenario like the BLM riots that we saw happening across the U.S. for months on end in 2020 and beyond. We had Democrat leaders saying that the riots and the violence were a myth. We had Democrat leaders, including our then vice president, who then ran for president and lost, thank God, Kamala Harris, helping to fundraise for the rioters who were destructive and violent. And they were selling a message that essentially that the violence wasn't happening. Don't trust your lying eyes, right? This same type of propaganda campaign is now happening against ICE. And we are seeing one side of the story being told. So we saw this happen with Ms. Good. We see this happening with Alex Pretti. And when you really dig into the actual facts of the case, it becomes a much more nuanced and understandable scenario, and not at all, murder on the streets. And again, this misinformation, just like during 2020, is almost exclusively coming from the left. So that's really my opinion there. And then the only other thing I'd say is that we see people like Tim Walz, as we saw back in 2020, individuals from the Democratic House and Senate, really riling up the violence on the streets, saying things like get in their faces, saying things like, let them know they're not welcome here, saying things like go out and oppose ICE. We see this type of rhetoric and worse used from the left, and then they act shocked when actual violence happens. So I think that deserves to be perhaps given its own article. As I said, I could dive into that for a lengthy period of time, but that's the overview there.
We probably should dive into that for a period of time on a future episode. But last question here, our audience largely Christian and conservative. We need to know how to handle some of them, particularly these viral clips that get maimed to no end, that have narrative to no end. How do you, as a journalist, share these clips, especially before facts are verified? Because that's happening a lot, and particularly with Christians and conservatives. And then effectively, whatever sinks in the most, whatever is the most emotionally connecting to our hearts and emotions, that's the story we run with, whether or not the facts prove otherwise. And that's a dangerous place to be for America. And honestly, I think it's an especially dangerous place for Christians to be, because we should be looking for the truth wherever it leads. And then by extension, that Christian principle ought to apply to our political conservatism. Do you have any guidelines for, how we should approach these viral clips and the way we consume news, and how do we discern fact from fiction? How do we share something before facts are necessarily settled or even disclosed or revealed or discovered? Because maybe it's an important story to share, but how do we qualify that so that we're not further confusing, maybe even some on our own side, whether that be politically or point of view?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that jumps to mind for me, and I think this is relevant for most people, is just one word. It's wait, or you might say patience. And so this is the reason I say this is for most people is because, if you're like a police chief or a spokesperson for a sheriff's office, or you're a politician who's going to be asked about this tomorrow, or you're a journalist, you might not be able to wait and to have patience. You might need to try to address what you can in the moment, and that's understandable. But the fact is that that's the small minority of people. Most people are not in that a microphone's going to be in your face type of situation. And for them, I would say just wait and have patience. There's actually a Bible verse, I believe it's in Proverbs, that says the first to speak in court sounds right until the cross-examination begins. One translation says the first to speak always sounds correct until his opposition is able to ask questions. The idea here is that, it's easy to make a story sound good until the facts and the cross-examination and the questions and the stress testing begins. And so that's why I say wait and have patience. Try to not look foolish by jumping on something and declaring, whether it's, declaring victory or declaring murder or declaring, whatever it is. We kind of saw this like with the Jussie Smollett case, right? People talking about how victimized he was and how terrible it was. And it, turns out that this was seemingly just a grand hoax and something laughable. But nonetheless, for hours prior, people were circulating it online and looked like fools. So yeah, just have patience. Do your due diligence in that waiting period to try and gather information. And fact check that information, try and dive into it and try to stress test it yourself and be open to more information as it comes in. Like you said, don't get married to a narrative, because when you're married to a narrative, you're kind of running with that Russian propagandistic idea of show me the man and I'll show you the crime. You don't want that. What you want is to find the facts and then decide what happened. So that's a little bit of my thought there.
Yeah, we can love law and order and search and seek it without loving chaos and without having to embrace or affirm chaos, and we can demand accountability without joining the propaganda machine. I think that's the key really in all of this going forward. Luke Edison, really appreciate the clarity and the insight. Thank you so much. That's going to do it for this episode of Cross Politic Countdown. Remember, do we go live? Normally we go live every Friday, noon Eastern, where we're covering the latest news, latest stories, and when Seattle sports is doing well, we're also covering that too. So you can expect some Super Bowl talk likely next week. All right, for Luke Edison, I'm Andrew Southwick. Thank you for being with us on this episode. If you want more, find us at CrossPoliticNews.com. CrossPoliticNews.com. I say it again, CrossPoliticNews.com. And until next time, so long.